Yeah, so thank you to everyone for joining us today on this webinar, where we are actually marking Women's Month. It's actually the last day of Women's Month. And the IPI thought it would be, important to facilitate a discussion around women journalists who are shaping climate and environmental reporting in Africa. My name is Mary Stella Aumasimiu. I work with the International Press Institute as their Africa Senior Legal Advocacy Officer, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session. In the background, I'm joined with my colleagues Nompilo Simanje, she's the Africa team lead. George is supposed to be somewhere in the background, so I think he'll join later. But I also see other of my colleagues, Domi and Gabriela, so it's great to have you all here. And we have an excellent panel that is going to take us through the discussions today, and I'm going to introduce them shortly. But to start us off, I just wanted to set the backdrop of our discussion today. And to do so, I'm going to come closer to home, being Kenya. This is where I'm based. And in the recent weeks, we actually had devastating floods, flash floods, and this cost us over 100 lives. Families were displaced, and property and infrastructural damage was quite severe. We are actually counting massive economic loss. And in this context, we could not avoid, the conversation around the climate crisis that Kenya is facing. And this is not, a story that is particular to Kenya. It is something that we are seeing across Africa. It's a familiar story across Africa. And we see more and more discussions around the need for us to build our climate resilience and to ensure more sustainable adaptation measures to the climate crisis that we are facing in Africa. More and more, we hear stories of deforestation, of land degradation, of biodiversity loss, of pollution and other environmental harms. And unfortunately, this is happening in a backdrop where there's an absence of strong accountability measures, as well as strong policy and governance structures. And at the center of the framing of this discussion and the building of awareness around climate issues are climate and environmental reporters, including women journalists who are carving their niche in climate reporting in the African continent. And so for this particular webinar, we thought it would be important for us to provide a platform for female reporters, not only who are in the panel, but also participants, to discuss their contribution to climate and environmental education, awareness, and justice in the African continent, together explore solutions to the unique challenges that are facing climate and environmental reporters, and also collectively see how we can strengthen the ability of women to report on these climate and environmental issues in the African continent. And to do so, we have an excellent panel of speakers from across Africa, and I'm going to introduce them shortly before we start our discussion. We have Diana Kibuka Nakayima. She's a professional teacher and journalist, and currently the communications officer at the Uganda Wildlife Authority. Diana is a senior multimedia journalist who specializes in environmental and climate reporting, and she runs the Dina's Planet podcast and blog. She's a multi-award winner for the work that she's done in radio documentaries and features. She's also the co-founder and president of the Entebbe Journalists Association, where they promote excellence in journalism. She's also a fellow at the NIDA Fellowship Center that brings a unique perspective to Africa climate change reporting. And finally, she's a contributor to the NALS magazine since 2024. Welcome, Diana. Our second speaker is Elodie Toto. She's an investigative journalist at Africa staff writer at Monga Bay, Africa, specializing in environmental and corporate accountability reporting. She has over a decade of experience across print, radio, TV, and digital media. Her focus is on the extractive industry and human rights violations, and her work has taken her across Africa, covering the politics of resource exploitation. She has previously worked for AFP, BBC, and Reuters. Welcome, Elodie. Our third speaker is Vivian Shime. She is the Africa Energy Transition Reporter at Climate Home News. Before that, she was the head of the climate desk at the Cable News in Nigeria, where she pioneered climate change reporting starting in 2021. She has also worked in a part-time role as Africa Journalism Manager at Climate Tracker in 2023, where she was also a Global Media Mentorship Fellow and a COP27 Climate Justice Fellow. She's currently a One World Media Fellow and a member of the Reuters Institute Oxford Climate Journalism Network. Because of her work, she has also received multiple awards. Thank you, Vivian. And finally, last but not least, we have Andiswa Matikinsa. She is a multi-award winning environmental investigative journalist from South Africa. Her reporting covers over 8 years with a focus on natural resources, energy, and the governance of such across Southern Africa. She joined Oxpeca's investigative environmental journalism in September 2018 to manage the Extractive's digital tool, Mine Alert, and produce several journalistic investigations based on data sourced and curated by Mine Alert. She has also worked on several Oxpeca's projects tracking, monitoring, and investigating different environmental issues, including wildlife crimes, as well as the status of renewable energy projects and the just energy transition in South Africa with Power Tracker. She has also worked as a researcher and junior reporter with Viewfinder Accountability Journalism. Thank you very much, Andiswa. And as you can see, fellow participants, that we are actually in good hands, given the profile of speakers that we have. And so without further ado, I'll quickly jump into our discussion today. And as a starting point, I would like to, call on our panelists to start us off with why this discussion is important, what really has been the impact of having more women journalists taking up climate and environmental journalism. Why is it important? What are we seeing from the women already in the space in terms of impact? I'll start with you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Stella, for that introduction. I hope I can be heard.
Yes, you are audible.
All right, thank you. First of all, I would love to say thank you for this platform, because we always look out for platforms like these ones to have our voices heard beyond where we sit. And this kind of discussion comes at a time when we see climate change and its effects is no longer an issue that we should really say it is too scientific and not proven. Actually, we say that the world has spoken. It has really spoken, and we are still speaking. So why is it making it important, especially on the side of female journalists, that the voices out there are still low? Not only coming from the female journalists, but generally from the journalism background. Many of the journalists are running away from covering issues of climate change and the environmental issues. They say it's not so much rewarding. The rewarding doesn't come so fast. So because it requires a lot of, sit down, analyze this data, look at that. So they want quick things, and they always run away. Secondly, they look at it as something that is a bit scientific in nature. And, for us women, even in the newsroom, they will tend to give you the softer part of, go and cover style, go and cover food, go and cover this. So when it comes to issues of this nature, women normally tend to run away. But we need a female voice in issues of climate change and its effect, because women are affected more when it comes to climate change effects. You realize that a percentage of even above 60% of the population that suffers when climate change hits hard are women. We look out for food for the families, we do the gardening. When we don't have what to provide to our homes, men will walk away in most cases. So if this female journalist gets a story from a fellow woman, I think it makes more sense than a man speaking for a woman. It has come at a time when women must learn to speak for fellow women. It is a time when a woman must speak and she must be heard. So if we see a voice of a woman fronting stories of climate change and fronting a woman in a story, to me, it makes sense. The first story that I really even remember putting out when I was starting the podcast was a female story. And actually, I drew it from Kenya. I drew it from Kenya. I may not remember the person I interviewed, but we met in Tanzania and we were discussing issues of climate change and how climate change affects women. And when this lady was speaking, I was like, okay, I think this is the right voice I should put out. And it was the first story that I ran on my podcast. That was 2023. So from that day, I said, all right, I think the story can make some good change. So when I went down to look for the feedback, you people, I have this podcast. Did you hear this woman talking? I was like, yeah. Can you please share us that podcast? Share us. So when that story started moving, I realized that, oh, when a woman speaks to a fellow woman and a voice is put out there, it creates a different kind of impact. So I think it is really coming at a time when the most affected, when it comes to climate change effects, must speak for themselves. So we shouldn't wait for men. I'm not saying climate change, segregates or it does not affect men or children but in terms of percentages, if a woman is affected more, if a woman in Africa who is doing the gardening, because for us in Africa, we rely on agriculture. So once we are hit with climate change, we are hit badly. We shall lose the food. We shall lose, So women must really stand up as gardeners of this continent. We must really stand up to speak in all angles. Whether you're a journalist, whether you're an advocate, doing advocacy work in climate change, whether you're a teacher in class teaching, whether you're a politician, when it comes to climate change, a woman's voice must really be up there. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you very much, Diana, for starting us off. I like what you said, that it's sort of a challenge, a call to women, that we must learn to speak for fellow women because we bring out, I think, the uniqueness of the stories. So it's a good challenge and a good call for us to start with. And so I'll move to Elodie. Do we see this impact, building on what Diana has said? Do you see this impact of actually having more women reporting on climate and environmental issues and actually changing how we report on climate and environmental issues? Elodie.
Thank you, Maristella. Yeah, I think Diana had a very valid point.
Yeah. Do you want to switch on your camera so that we can see you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think she had a very valid point because even though women in Africa are half of the population, we're still somehow seen as a minority. And because we are seen as a minority, we're not the people who can have a voice that is really loud. So the importance to have women in environmental journalism is also the capacity to give a voice to the voiceless, kind of. And we don't only give a voice to the women, we also give a voice to other communities that are marginalized. As I'm thinking here about indigenous people, for instance. I remember 15 years ago when I was looking into environmental journalism, I was mostly seeing stories about COP, about political and economical decision, about which international instance decided to allocate that amount of money to that project. And at the end of the day, it didn't really make sense to me, the impact it was having on the ground, what it really meant. There was a lot of concepts that didn't really make sense. But now that you have more women into environmental journalism, we have that tendency to talk to the people, to really report on what's happening on the ground, on situation that may look really basic in other point of view, but that's actually explaining what is properly happening on the ground. You were earlier referring to the floodings that happening in Nairobi. And that's true. A lot of family are displaced. There is a lot of infrastructure that has been destroyed. But at the same time, there is also family that has been suffering from it. There are also women that cannot then work on their fields. And in a lot of stories, we can still see all the structural effects of climate change. But having access to what's happening inside the homes, inside of people's lives, makes, I believe, makes people comprehend it, makes people feel. And once you have that sympathy for someone, you have a bigger understanding of a situation that previously was a bit abstract.
Have you paused there, Elodie?
I beg your pardon?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that you have paused there. Can you
But
hear us?
yeah, but what am I supposed to post?
No, 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 not pause. I thought you had,
Up,
paused.
post. Okay, no,
Yes.
no, 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 no.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Elodie, because what I hear from you is something very important, that an impact that, women are bringing in media in this space is bringing the human out, the human behind the story, ensuring that that human face, that human voice is not lost when it comes to reporting on climate and environmental issues. And I think I'll go now to Vivian. I don't know if you can share a bit of the stories that you've worked on and how you see your presence there, or even just having mentorship from other female climate and environmental reporters has brought an impact in your work. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much, Maristella. Can you hear me? Yeah, so I'm going to build on the premise that Diana and Elodie already set, which is that women of course are not impacted the same way as men, and I'm going to set the scene here, right? Earlier this month, IIED put out a report that of how climate change is affecting women. And in that report, I saw something that I hadn't even considered before. And it's that climate change also affects women's menstrual cycles, right? So, for example, in the kind of examples the report was giving is one, women who live in drought-prone areas don't have enough water to be able to bath anytime they need to bath and keep themselves clean and maintain their hygiene. And this is because of climate change. Also, in some social constructs or religions, women who live in those areas are not able to wear lighter clothing when it's hot, or or when they feel some kind of heat. So they have some itching, the discomfort, and all that. And then when you talk about in terms of changing their sanitary towels and washing up themselves and not having access to water in drought prone areas, these are like things that we don't necessarily look at when we are thinking around climate change, right? And so when we are talking climate change or when we are telling our stories, how do we tell them from the human impact? How do we tell them from this is what's happening on the ground, right? I know when you talked about the flood in Kenya, I was just thinking to myself that I've thought about these things in the past around when flooding happens, why don't we have disaggregated data? Who talks about the women who were pregnant in those areas? Who talks about women with children who wouldn't leave their children? And then sometimes they drown because they would rather get their children to safety first before they think about themselves. But the men, some of them can climb trees easily, some of them can run off. Some of them don't even have that emotional attachment that women have to their children. So you think around these things. I know I was reading a book earlier this year around Invisible Women. It's a book written by Caroline Perez. And she talks about how sometimes when we think around what's happening globally and even in countries, women are usually behind the scenes. It feels like nobody thinks about women, right? Now, for example, I'll give you an example when it comes to climate change. Last year, the IEA put out a report that the clean cooking target is no more, we can't meet the clean cooking target anymore, that it's now been pushed back to 2040. And you wouldn't be surprised if we get another report in some years' time to say, oh, clean cooking target can't be met anymore by 2040. It's now 2050. And ask me, what was their excuse? Their excuse is that there's no funding and infrastructure to be able to meet that, right? So now who suffers for that? And during that period, I was in a community for reporting, and I spoke to women around there. And these women are going, some of them are going blind because they are cooking with firewood. Some of them told me they've developed eye problems, they've gone to the hospital, some of them are using glasses, but they still continue cooking with these things. And so I put that in that story and I put it side by side, and I'm like, this is what the world is saying, but who bears the most, who bears the actual impact, who bears the brunt, who stays in the kitchen more often? It's women. So these are some of the contexts we have to start bringing out, as women journalists. If you're a woman journalists reporting environment are the ones who can relate better to these stories. They're the ones who can say, this is how this affects me, and this is how I want to tell this story, and this is how this story will help, bring the kind of solutions that we want to see. And not just in the kind of problems that women go through with climate change, but women have solutions. Some of these solutions are not being highlighted. There are a lot of women who are doing deep work in communities. I'll give you an example. I did a story sometime about a woman who is planting mangroves in the Niger Delta. And what she does, she's also recruiting other women to do that as well, to plant more trees, to clean up the Niger Delta and things. And sometimes when the government goes there, of course, government led by parastatals and ministries led by men, they go there and they also video some of those efforts as part of their work. But it's a woman who is doing this thing, right? And so I went to that community and I highlighted her story. I talked about how she's also recruiting other women and the way they are also, making money as a result, selling these the mangroves to even the government. They get paid off to companies that have polluted the area and they get paid, right? And a lot of other media organizations have also picked up on that story. So we have to look at what are the solutions that women are bringing that we can put up.
It looks like we have lost Vivian. I hope it's not my internet. Okay, yeah, it looks like we have lost Vivian. Unfortunately, we have lost her at a time when she was really on the roll. But I will come back to her when she's back on air. But I want to build up on something that she said in terms of how through the story, she has given us at least 3 stories that she has covered, that having her in this particular space allowed the public to actually place a gender lens into the climate change and environmental story, in the sense that now we are looking at issues around menstrual cycle, how we're looking at the issue of how extreme weather events actually impact women the most. And I like her to continue with what she was saying when she comes back, but I'm going to jump to Andiswa right now, because Andiswa, I know when I was introducing you, I could see a lot of your work has been around trying to use creative and also innovative ways and tools to convey climate and environmental stories. So would you please possibly touch on the work that you've done with Mine Alert and Wild Eye, and how through using some of these tools, you're able to tell climate and environmental stories in a way that actually resonates with different audiences, including, vulnerable groups, including bearers. And this over to you.
Thanks a lot, Maristella, and morning to everyone that's joining us today from different parts of the continent and beyond. So as you've mentioned, for the past 8 years, I have worked across Oxpacker's digital tools, such as Mine Alert, Wild Eye, and Power Tracker, tracking and sharing information on mining activities and related documentation and licensing on these, as well as wildlife crimes, and how the justice systems across the continent are faring in prosecuting these, as well as the rise of renewables in Southern Africa and the impacts of the global energy transition. I'd say that these interactive journalism tools have created a platform for open access to information that is often hidden and hard to find for the general public. So these tools have been useful for journalists as well as communities that are affected and impacted by the issues that they deal with. We found that policy makers often also interact with these tools, and the investigations that we produced from the database that the tools are based on. And this continues to show the importance of investigative journalism as well as technological innovations in tackling some governance issues that we face across the continent and across the world. I'd say that the tools also bridge a gap between vulnerable communities and individuals, as well as decision makers. We are able to make invisible systems visible through our tools, through our investigations, and these could be patterns of wildlife crimes or the pace of the energy transition in Southern Africa and how it impacts vulnerable communities. So we've done a lot of stories with Power Tracker, our most recent tool that I've worked with at Oxpackers, looking at the impacts of the just energy transition and moving away from coal in South Africa and what this means for communities that have been dependent on the coal value chain. So these are people that work in coal mining towns, in towns where there's coal-fired power stations, and what the shutting down of these power stations means for those communities and for the survival of people in those communities. I'd also say that my work being part of these investigative projects that track environmental crimes and extractives industry have definitely shown how women journalists are pushing beyond surface level reporting. We're able to connect the dots between policy, power, and the lived experiences of people on the ground, whether it's communities that are affected by mining or perhaps the silent crisis of biodiversity loss. I also want to mention, I think you raised the point of mentorship in your question to, I'm not sure if it was Elodie or Vivian. I think it was Vivian. So I'd just like to mention or point out that Oxpackers is a woman-founded and woman-led organization, and being a part of that kind of an organization, being groomed and mentored as a young journalist and coming up through that kind of a background has definitely created a safe space for me as a woman journalist and other women journalists to confidently thrive in environmental and climate journalism. It's opened up spaces for us where we're given opportunities to cover stories that would otherwise be given to our male colleagues in other newsrooms, because the gender balance is a part of our agenda and the DNA of our newsroom and our organization. So it's created a balance and fairness in the allocation of opportunities. And it's created also a space where I think our other roles that fall outside of journalism as women are seen and recognized. They are not only taken as a distraction that takes away from the time and the effort that we're able to put in into our work. So we're able to become well-rounded and holistic contributors in the space of environmental and climate journalism.
Thank you very much for that, Andiswa. It's always good to hear about, women uplifting other women, and glad to hear. I didn't know that about Oxpecker, so very glad to hear about that. And I like what you've also said about making invisible systems visible, and it also links with what Vivian was talking about invisible women and how it's important to actually give visibility to populations that have been invisible for the longest time. But I'd like you to also build up on something you mentioned about, your work around coal, because that's a very sensitive topic, especially in South Africa. And also something Vivian said is about how women are most affected in conversations, for example, around coal and moving away from, the discussions around renewable energy. Is this something you've actually delved into in the context of your work?
Yes, so we have delved into stories of how in coal communities, pollution in particular has affected women and children, and of course, minors in those communities, and how they are left to deal with the health impacts of living in those communities and also working in coal mines. As I mentioned, that is the one stable source of those value chains, where a coal mine is, where a coal fire station is, every other business or every other economic activity that happens around that area is centered around coal. You find children that are growing up with health issues related to these. So I've covered those kinds of stories. And then when we now speak of the just energy transition, where people have created livelihoods around this value chain, as unhealthy as it is, they're now expected to uproot their lives because there's no longer any work. Coal mining towns have become ghost towns. Oxpacker's Power Tracker has definitely done a lot of work on that. Our tool actually also maps alongside the coal power stations that projected for decommissioning in the next 30 years. We're also tracking actively renewable energy projects that are now coming up as we prepare for that decommissioning. And in some cases where the decommissioning has already happened, how many renewable energy projects are coming up at the same time. And as these projects are coming up, what are the impacts, not only in terms of mitigation of the core impacts or mitigating fossil fuel impacts, but also what kind of socio-economic impacts are being experienced by the community. So in terms of jobs, in terms of upward social mobility, in terms of empowering communities perhaps to go into business, empowering the youth to go into education streams that will allow them to form part of this new value chain, which is now renewable energy, and also making it a sustainable source of income and a sustainable source of livelihood for those communities that are around those coal communities.
Thank you for that, Ndiswa. I'll come to you, Diana. I know you gave us a teaser of your podcast, but I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more about why you actually chose this particular platform or avenue to actually tell climate and environmental stories. I know podcasting has become quite popular in the recent past. I do follow a number of podcasts and I was very happy to come across yours. But do tell us why you felt this was an avenue you want to use and what gap you are trying to fill with this particular podcast.
All right, thank you, even for following and checking me out. So, Dinner's Planet came about in 2023. Actually, I thought about the name. I was there. I first made it African kind of thing. Then I say it is too wide. Then I said, okay, let me draw it to my name. And one of the things I chose, actually, an audio podcast, because we have the audio visual where people, flash the videos, sit in a room, and then the cameras are in front of them. But I decided to remain with the voice because I believe there is a lot of magic behind a voice that you don't see. So people normally tend to imagine a lot of things when they just hear the voice. And I wanted to keep it at that. Let the message be heard behind a voice that can never be seen. As simple as that. And one of the things I chose to start that podcast, I was running stories on radio, our local radio, that is CBS. And it reached a time when I felt the space or the time being given to me is not enough by the editors. So they could only give me something like about 2 minutes to run the story on climate change matters. And it went to a time when they were like, then it's taking a lot of time. Can we reduce to from 1 minute again to about 45 seconds? Now I was like, okay, right, I can create my own space. So I sat down one morning, obviously after several trainings. I'm one person who really loves trainings because every day is a learning, you learn something. So after these trainings from ACME, trainings from the Danida Fellowship, trainings, actually spaces like these ones we are having at this time. I said, why don't I come up? I'm hearing this thing, podcast, what is it about? So I opened up the internet, read about it. I went through the steps on the internet, and boom, I was there in my own space. So I said, okay, where do I start from? So I really needed space. I really needed space to tell stories beyond the time that is being given to me by my local radio. So the time was no longer enough for me, and I had the stories to put out. Then secondly, I wanted to reach out beyond beyond the audience that I serve, because the local radio mainly was running stories in our local language, and that is Luganda, widely listened to by most of the people in Uganda. But then I wanted to reach out to the international friends out there who can, listen to some English. And when I went to cover COP, and that was COP 20, the one that happened in Egypt, now I had stories to put out in English. So I started thinking, okay, my radio has got a very small space for English that would even take something like about 5 minutes, a bulletin, and I only had 30 seconds to run an English story. So I said, so where do I take this other, English content? I said, okay, let me open up this podcast. I need to be out there. So you see, quite a number of factors now driving me to the language thing. I need to speak out to the bigger audience in English. That was one. Two, CBS wasn't giving me enough time with the so many stories I was beginning to collect. Then three, I had to implement what I was learning in the spaces, in the training spaces I was getting. Because as you learn how to cover climate change and other issues, they're also encouraging you to open up your own spaces so that you can reach out and have those stories put out. And also to inspire people so that you can have more people join you. You cannot tell these stories alone. Even if you create these very many stories, you can't have all these stories. But when you inspire people and you feel like, okay, yeah, I've inspired these people, so we can tell these stories together. I would point out one outstanding, that is the Green Turtle Africa. He's one person that I've always hosted on Dinner's Planet. So as I kept on hosting him on Dinner's Planet, talk about issues, most especially to summarize those hard topics discussed in COPs, in the different COPs that we normally attend. So he said, then I think I can also start up something. So I said, it's okay, start up. So he started up a group that is Green Turtles Uganda. Actually, it is Green Turtles Uganda. And I am happy that at least Dinner's Planet is now beyond just a platform that is talking or informing people about climate change, but it is inspiring people to open up spaces of advocacy for climate change. And soon he's also holding a symposium on climate change, youth symposium for climate change in Uganda. And now Dinner's Planet is happening to be one of the sponsors, partners, to make sure that the symposium happens. So what is taking me there? To still listen to the voices of the youth. So Dinner's Planet, much as it is fronting climate change, nature and environment, etc., but I would prefer to give a platform to the youth. And why? Because in most cases, decision-making tables tend to put them away. And will always be at the receiving end. The boardroom sat, even at the COPs, the COPs when we see the meetings happening, you see the youth will always have their discussions will be in the side events, side rooms. But at the table where we feel they should be represented, they are not there. So as much as we open up these spaces, we should give them a platform to be heard. And if I hadn't given Green Turtle Uganda a platform, probably he wouldn't have opened up his own space now that is bringing in more youth on board. And to me, that one I'm already happy. The voice, I chose the voice. That one was very clear. I chose the voice and not the video because I believe there is magic in a voice that someone is not seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, really for sharing the origin story of your podcast. Very interesting, because when you initially mentioned that they were giving you 2 minutes, I was shocked, like, what will you do in 2 minutes? And then later you say they were reducing your time, and it was even more shocking. But even just listening to the work that you're doing, it keeps emphasizing what I think will become the the baseline for this for our webinar, in the sense that, giving spaces to people whose voices have been ignored or sidelined in let's say traditional media, and even the upcoming digital spaces that we are seeing. So thank you very much, Diana, for that. And I want to bring in another angle to our discussion. I think we have touched a little bit on it, and that's the issue of safety and security of women journalists who are reporting on climate and environmental issues. When Diana started, she mentioned that there's been a tendency to give women softer stories, let's say, of education and health, and a sort of sense that climate and environmental stories are hard stories that should be given to, let's say, male journalists. And we see a challenge to this particular perspective. But it's also important to actually really look at what are the safety and security considerations that women should have when they go actually out to the field to investigate climate and environmental stories, and what newsrooms should be doing, and what other organizations should be doing to enhance the security of journalists. So let me start with you, Elodie. Maybe from your experience or just what you've been seeing in the space, what are the safety and security considerations you have when undertaking such investigations?
Thank you, Maristella. To be honest, for me, for what I've been encountered, because I'm mostly doing a lot of field reporting and mostly in places where I'm not from. So when I prepare, the first key to prepare a story is preparation, strategy, and collective support, because no journalist should have to manage anything by itself, by herself. So first, I approach every investigation with a strong risk assessment. So before going in the field, I'll try to map out all the actors that are involved, all the political interests, the companies, the local power dynamics. I don't only focus on my story on its own, on what I'm going to see on the ground. I have to understand the whole dynamic, the whole context before even going there myself. I have to identify what can be the potential risk and also what I can do to mitigate them. That helps me a lot to anticipate every type of situation rather than just react to what can happen to me. I also rely a lot on local network. I love to work with trusted journalists, with community members. And I mean, they are essential not only for access, but also for safety. Because even though I do a lot of research before coming to the fields, I they do understand the context better than me. They do have access to a lot of unspoken rules and red lines that outsiders like me often don't know about. And I mean, it's even pregnant for women because there is a lot of unspoken rules. It depends on communities. Every communities have their own rules, their own way to look at women. They will their own expectations when they see you coming as a woman. So it's really important for you to understand where you're setting your foot and how to behave around people. And also it's very intentional on my side to structure my reporting prior the reporting itself. For instance, I'm trying to control the condition of interaction as much as possible. Like I'm trying to choose to meet in neutral spaces. I'm trying to avoid isolated situation, even though a lot of environmental reporting, I'm thinking about conservation stories, I'm thinking about mining stories. it do happen in remote area, especially when you go to the communities. Most of the times they're living in remote areas. So that you can't control, but the interviews that you can do in non-remote areas, you have to make them in neutral space as much as possible. And when you go to remote area, you have to make sure that people know where you're going, that people from outside will be able to check on you, to be able to react quickly if something happens. And it's safety in every type of sense of safety. It can be car accident, it can be disease, it can also be assault. As people see sometimes a woman just going on her own in a place where they don't know you, something can also and you start questioning also power dynamics, you start questioning politics, economical situation. It can be dangerous. So it's important to have people who can still have an eye on your whereabouts and who can react if something goes wrong. I also had to develop a strong sense of boundaries. It's important. I mean, as you said earlier, for years, in newsrooms, they had a tendency to give women the soft stories, so the stories that are considered more easy. So now that we have access to stronger stories, sometimes we may have the tendency to actually put aside our own safety for the matter of the story itself. But it's important to set some boundaries for ourselves. It's important to always have in mind that a good journalist is a journalist that it's alive. A good journalist is a journalist who's not traumatized. So even though sometimes it's frustrating, it's important to know when to walk away from a source, from a situation, even though it's losing part of the story. It's important to protect yourself. And to do all of this, it's very important to have editorial support. And when I'm thinking about editorial support, I mean editors who understand the risk that you are taking, editors that won't push you into unsafe situation, that are willing to adjust timelines and expectation. It's important also to have access to legal support because the moment you start poking strong companies, they will fight back and they will fight back sometimes in the legal sides. And it's important for you to set on the ground. So it's also important to have safety protocol, to have even psychological support. As women, I have the feeling that we are facing more harassment, intimidation, and even sometimes sexual abuses than men can encounter. And because we still want to look strong, we may have the tendency to not mention it, to not talk about it. And I think that's important to bring it on the table, to shift the shame in the way, and to just show the world what it means sometimes for us to go on the ground and to report. And for that to be able to do it safely, it's also important to have that kind of support to then be able to continue to do our work properly. So finally, the most important, and I think that it comes from the kind of meeting that we are having now, it's important to have solidarity. It's important to talk among ourselves, women journalists, to share our experiences, to learn about each other's strategies. And it just, it helps break the isolation that we can sometimes feel and create informal system of protection and knowledge sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Elodie. Before you even leave the screen, because you've shared very important tips as well as, sectors that we need to think about in terms of ensuring your safety and security when you're in the field. And I wanted to ask whether, this is something that you have learned from experience. Is it, something that you've learned from, let's say, training, making use and leveraging training and capacity building programs, or is it something that, the newsrooms that you are attached to or organizations that you're attached with actually provide you that sort of support to ensure that you're safe and secure when you're in the field?
I might say it's a bit of everything. I started journalism without, I had training from a journalism school, but at the end of the day, you learn something in a classroom, and the moment you end up on the ground, you see a complete different situation. In classroom, you learn about the theory, and the practical, it's completely different. So that's where empirism is kicking in. You're just learning from what you're experiencing on the ground. But I also had the opportunity to have training. The EFA training, I don't know if you have heard about, but it's kind of workshop that happens for a week where people are trained with other journalists by sometimes members of the army. They train you about how to react in challenging situation. They teach you how to react when you are facing some authorities that not really happy to see you around, to react when you are getting kidnapped. And those trainings are very important. And I hope every newsroom will actually push every journalist to be a part of them. And I know that you have organization that's like IWMF that's actually offering those training for free for women journalists. So that's very important because usually those training are quite expensive. So if you have the opportunity, please to register there. You will have access to that great training for free. But those training, for what I've recognized, are a bit limited because so far they have been made by men and thought for men. And I will go a bit deeper on that. Sometimes it has been shaped for white men in situations that not always are matching our own discomfort that we can encounter in our practice as women, Black women journalists. So yeah, I think that's why I think it's important to talk among ourselves because women in environmental journalists is not something old. We're still discovering a lot on the ground. We're still trying to push people to accept us. So there is still a lot of room for improvement. Currently at Mongabe, I'm part of the safety committee, so I'm trying to implement some guidelines to set for every staff who have to travel on the ground for reporting, male and female. And I can see as I'm trying to implement those guidelines that, I mean, we're in 2026 and we have still to implement them. They were not there before. So it's a job that can only be made based on the experience of everyone. So that's why it's important to share among ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Elodie, for that. And just to mention that at IPI, we're also developing a sort of risk assessment tool. My colleague Nompilo is taking the lead on that, and maybe towards the end, she'll share a bit more about the work that we are doing with regards to that particular area. And I also wanted to, move to Vivian. I hope we still have you. I remember there was a time when, currently we're actually working on a report on SLAPs in Africa, and SLAPs being strategic litigation against public participation. And that's how I actually connected with Vivian. And that was really with regards to, the legal challenges that journalists faced when, working on climate and environmental stories. But when I was talking to Vivian, she was telling me how sometimes she has to go to remote areas where she's not quite sure about her safety and some of the considerations she has in mind when she's actually engaged in such assignments. And she has actually adopted also other safety and security strategies for herself. But Vivian, I really wanted you to give us, your insights about how we can, enhance the safety and security measures when women have to actually undertake investigations with regard to climate and environmental stories. Vivian, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcella. I totally agree with everything Elodie has said. I think she said so much already. And I would say that it's usually not easy. Like some of those stories you talk about, and women being assigned tough stories, it's usually not easy when a woman has to be the one to take on some of those difficult stories. And in the last newsroom where I worked, I was the only one on the desk for a while. I pioneered the desk, and then I was the one doing the stories and having to travel, into far-flung communities, having to do all of even the hard stories and all. And so I remember on some occasions, like there was one where I traveled up to 3 hours on water, going to a community where I knew nobody. I was just the only one. And even my family, everybody was concerned because when I sent my PIN location and they saw that I was on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, and they're like, you're deep inside the Niger Delta, there are militants there, you have to get out of there, you have to find a way to, just keep yourself safe. And I also know I've traveled to a community before where I was doing my story. I was actually almost done with the story. And then this man comes and he starts filming. He wasn't aware of our visit, but the people who came to visit, they knew. And we had traveled deep into like these communities deep inside the forest. And so this man starts filming, he's shouting, he's saying, who are you people? And he's threatening us. He says he's coming, he takes his bike and then I don't know where he went. And so that fear that he probably went to organize young or youths and stuff, with machete and things. So we had to leave immediately. So I think that one thing I would tell journalists is to women journalists is to always be very careful when you're on the field. When you notice things like that, when you start noticing that kind of, agitation or there's some kind of tension happening, leave that place immediately. You don't have to. Elodie said it that a good journalist is one who is alive to tell tell another story the next day, right? You have to be alive to tell more stories. You don't have to kill yourself because of a story. So at any slightest provocation, leave that place and always have a means of transportation that is swift, that will take you out of any environment. Now, for example, that particular story that we went to do, we were deep inside this community. It doesn't have access roads and stuff. And so we didn't opt to drive to a particular point and then go on foot into the community. We had to use motorcycles so that we can easily leave that community if anything happened. And so that was what we did. And so when it happened, we left immediately, have a swift means of transportation. And it also happened recently when I went to do a story here in the Niger Delta around Shell's activities. And I did see that we were being monitored. You would see like some army, security personnel, they are just watching and stuff. And in one of the locations there was a man we saw, and the people I was with, they said, this man, we've seen him before. We know he's part of the people who are doing things, and you don't even have to talk to him. But I went to talk to them, and the man left immediately. And so the people I was with, they were signaling me, we have to go, and we had to leave there. And so that's another point I want to make. Don't ever go alone. You as a woman, you always have to have company. If you know that the story you're going to tell is a sensitive one, don't go alone. Go with somebody. Sometimes I even mentor, like I know there was this young boy I was mentoring at the time. He's a journalist as well. Sometimes when I'm going to the state where he lives, because I know it's the North Central and it's places where we can have some kind of conflicts and all that, I call him and say, can you go with me to this place so we can tell the story? And he gets credit for what he has done. So sometimes if you go alone, just imagine if I was alone in that Shell community and those security people get a hold of me. You can imagine what they would do. So sometimes don't go alone. Go with a man, go with someone you trust. And when you're going into a community, announce yourself. I usually know that some people want to go in and do some kind of investigations and they don't want the community to know. But I would rather, if I'm doing undercover, I would rather say, okay, this is what I'm here to do. for the last story I did, I went and I said, okay, this is what I'm here to do. I'm a researcher, but I hope you're comfortable having this on media and that this is going to appear on media. Because sometimes the moment you put it forward that, oh, I'm a journalist or I'm media, people can start getting, especially if they're doing something wrong, right? So even when you're doing undercover journalism, still try to announce yourself when you get into a community. Tell them that this is what you're here to do. You're here to get their stories. You're here to talk about what's happening, and still tell the chiefs that I am here in your community so they're aware. The last story that I did, the one on the Shell community, I told the chief, I went to his house, I sat down with him and I said, I am here to talk to your people. Can you provide some people for me? And he did that. And he even went with me to different parts of the community for me to tell my story, take pictures, to be able to use in my story. So sometimes when you go into these communities, announce yourself, find trusted people, local people in those communities that you can tell, this is what I'm here to do. Can you support me to tell this story? This is how it's affecting you and things like that. So yeah, that's something else I would say. I would also talk about digital safety. I feel like sometimes, especially in this our age and time of live streaming, and people want to tell people what they're doing. People want to post immediately. You have to protect yourself as a female journalist. You can't just put up your camera and start saying, hey, okay, now I'm currently in this community, see what's happening, they're mining and people are dying. You might not make it out of there. So try to protect yourself. Try not to give away your location and things like that when you're on the field. I think Elodie mentioned that, or also telling people where you're going, when, and giving updates. This is something that my office also does. Before I go to the field, we do like a document for safety. We write down things. They're telling you, check in every 1 hour, check in every 30 minutes, check in every 2 hours. Where are you at this point? Who are you with? Send us pictures. So these are things that you can do before you go into the field. Do your risk assessment, do a document, tell people, let people know where you are at every point. And at the moment, something else I also do, I set an SOS. So I have like numbers that I can easily, once I press my power button, maybe like 2 times, it starts dialing those numbers. So those people know I'm in trouble and I'm not safe where I am. So these are like things that you can, start doing to be able to keep yourself safe. Yeah. Something else in terms of, connecting with local people as well. You can also ask yourself, do I need to be there? Right? So there are some stories that that these stories are dangerous, and you ask yourself, do I really need to be there? For example, the story that I did on lithium mining in Nigeria, I live far, far, far from the north. And I think also in terms of, going there, funding and all that, but also because of security, right? I had to work with another journalist. And even while I was working with another journalist and doing the desk reporting and writing and research, I still got calls from this particular individual who was working with the Chinese, who works with the Chinese company and who knows what's happening in this community. And then he's calling me and saying, when are you coming? Show me, come and have a meeting with me and things like that. Because he knows that it will be easier for him to harm me if I were sitting with him or if I met him physically. So sometimes you have to ask yourself, is this a story I really have to go there for? And so we worked with another male journalist who did the field reporting and who had even previously had issues with that particular company with what they are doing in the north with mining. And then he has a court case with them. And this same guy was calling him to tell him to come and meet him. And he was also calling me to tell me to come meet him, especially when he saw that we had already started emailing the Chinese embassy, asking questions and stuff. So you have to always weigh, your choices, where you have to be, who you're going with, the sources you can trust on the ground, tell the local community people you're coming, leave the environment immediately if you notice any slightest provocation, and please do not post your location and things like that, and do your risk assessment before you get to the field. And yeah, you're definitely going to stay protected.
Thank you very much, Vivian, for that. Some very good tips there. And thank you for sharing your story and how you're navigating this particular space. We have about 20 minutes left and we're about to actually enter our Q&A session. So I'm actually encouraging participants who have any questions, any comments, and they'd like to actually share either on the chat box or or actually, unmute yourselves and give your intervention, please feel free to do so. But before I actually go to that session, I just wanted to go to, and this were, Vivian and Elodie have talked about some of their safety and security considerations that they have. I would like you to maybe possibly mention about any possible barriers that you've experienced with regards to the work that you're doing, and how you've navigated that. Have you gotten enough support from newsrooms and other civil society organizations? Possibly, what can we do better to support women in this space?
Thanks, Maristella. Very valuable insights from both Vivian and Elodie around safety of journalists in the field. I believe this is a very important aspect of the work that we do, and creating or ring fencing ourselves against a lot of issues that might put us at risk. In terms of other challenges and barriers that I've had to overcome in the field, I'd say one of the biggest challenges in climate and environmental journalism recently is the scarcity of resources. As we know, our newsrooms are facing shrinking budgets globally, and our beat, despite its urgency, a lot of the time is often underfunded. To navigate this, I've had to be quite intentional and strategic in the stories that I cover and the ideas for investigations that I wish to pursue. So what I have done a lot is aligning my story ideas, and perhaps I think with Oxpackers as well, with the tools that we develop, aligning these with emerging funding priorities. So for instance, now with Power Tracker, we're particularly looking at the energy transition. At the time of Wild Eye, we were looking at the issue of biodiversity. And when we were looking at Mine Alert, it was more about climate justice, community activism, and empowering people with information and data to be able to become active participants when it comes to natural resource governance. I've also leaned into collaboration a lot, working cross-border and doing multiple multidisciplinary projects. Where we are able to share resources, we're able to share expertise, and of course, the impacts around those are also shared. I've also found that my cross-border work has been some of the most impactful work that I've done, looking at issues perhaps in South Africa and one of our neighboring countries, Zimbabwe, where my recent focus was on lithium mining and looking at this mineral as a critical mineral for the just energy transition. So doing that work has had some really great impacts in recent months, not only winning awards, but also creating conversations with multiple stakeholders, such as the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, having the Zimbabwean government ban the export of raw lithium and concentrated lithium in recent months based on our cross-border investigations that we've done, as well as training that we did with Zimbabwe-based journalists that were then given grant funding to actually pursue these stories. So starting from a training and mentorship point of view, and then creating funding opportunities for these journalists that we've trained, and then watching them grow into the Power Tracker community of practice by becoming cross-border collaborators for internationally recognized investigations. I'd say another challenge that we face across the continent is access to data and sources, and then sometimes in spaces where decisions are being made, we also don't have access to these, whether we're looking for policy documentations, whether we're asking to be brought into the policy implementation phase of policies where we're left out, and we now have to fight to get into the spaces. I've also over time built networks and developed specialized skills in data journalism, and also using our innovative tools to uncover and sort of like interpret the information that isn't always readily available. for us as journalists and also for communities that are on the ground.
Thank you very much, Andisa, for that. And you're going to help us segue into the next stage of, question and answers, Q&A. And I'm inviting participants. If you have any questions, any interventions, please free to do so. You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat box. But I see Fiona is here, and I'm sorry, I'd love to put you on the spot. We've had, I think, when Andiswa mentioned mentorship, we cannot move away from that discussion without, maybe just hearing a little bit of your insights as, a founder of Oxpeckers and, running an organization, an environmental newsroom. Are you able to just share your insights around your experience managing such an outfit and how you are, shaping this space and how Oxpeckers is actually shaping this space? Fiona, do you mind? Yes, thank you. You've already been muted. Yes.
No,
Sorry for
thank you
putting you on
very
the spot.
much. No problem. Peter, thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic to see so many working and aspirant journalists, women journalists, moving into this space. I think it's very important that we hear more, we get more of women's voices involved in reporting on the environment and climate. So thank you very much for hosting us all and for encouraging that move. I've been doing this beat for a very long time now, so when I started out doing it, environmental journalism was hardly even a known beat, let alone one that women sort of put up their hand and said, I want to do this. So yeah, I mean, it's great to see the advance of women on this beat. So when I set up Oxpeckers 13 years ago, one of our main mandates was to encourage more women journalists to get involved on this beat, mainly because it's a beat that I know and because I think it's a good, as I said, a good area for women to get involved in. So we do a lot of mentoring of women journalists. Most of our team, as Andiswa mentioned previously, are women. We're a women-run organization, and so we understand what women go through in order to succeed in this arena. We do a lot of training and mentoring, a lot of it one-on-one mentoring with the journalists, women journalists who work with us. I think one of our other team members may still be on this meeting. Her name is Roxanne Joseph. She does a lot of training via the Oxpeckers Academy. And that, I think, again, Andiswa referred to that during her earlier presentation. Mostly what we need to do is apply journalistic standards and protocols and policies to the beat. So just, because we're a bunch of women who are involved in the beat doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be treated all that much differently from men in the beat, but there are certain considerations that need to be taken into account when women journalists are working in the field. As Dina mentioned, I think it was Diana mentioned, that there's certain safety protocols that perhaps need to be taken more seriously when women go into the field. But essentially, it's just another journalistic beat, but it's one that we at Oxpeckers take very seriously. So I don't know, Nompilo, whether I've answered any questions, but as I say, I'm heartened to see this conversation happening, and thank you for inviting us to join it.
And thank you really for honoring our invite. It has been great to hear insights from, Andiswa and yourself around the work that, Oxpeckers is doing. And we look forward to, engaging more with the work that Oxpeckers is doing. I don't see any other hands up. Diana, over to you.
Thank you. One of the things when we talk about safety of us in the field, due to the fact that now we are so much online, the issue of online safety is very, very important. I was listening to a colleague who was really emphasizing the issue of posting where you are. You know, we love a lot of TikToking and we love a lot of, being out there in the spaces. So for us who get deep into such stories, spaces, people that even don't wish us to be there. So how safe are you online? Because there is a lot of online harassment and then the safety needs to be heightened up there. We're also limited as female journalists to pick stories. There are certain stories that you really want to pick, even beyond the times that people should expect you home. But because of now the gender roles and then the timing, you feel you may miss out on that story. I'll give an example. There was a story that I was following up on issues of biodiversity kind of laws, but related to waste management. And the only way I could get this good story was probably at night. And I had to use some of the leaders to back me up, reach the site where I wanted to get the story and get that story. I imagined if I had gone alone, the kind of reception that we received wasn't sweet at all. But after people realizing that I was backed up by the leaders of that same region, that village, they really had to back off. But after still, the harassment now went online. Now at some point, people don't want to believe that you're this journalist who is passionate about what you're doing. And obviously they will say that this time you're coming up as an advocate for doing advocacy work. So at times, true, you tend to do away from journalism because you feel journalism is not giving you the impact that you would love to create. I will personally declare that at some point when I feel I am pissed off and the environment is getting, destroyed to a state I feel the journalism is not working out, I will wear the coat of advocacy and push that side. Or if I feel I cannot communicate better, I will tip off this advocacy team that please, we are dying. And then I'll go behind the advocacy team to have my story told. I'll cite this example as I conclude. We had a forest that was being cleared. The only forest in Entebbe municipality where I stay that is holding the strong waves of Lake Victoria. And some people wanted to take over, clear it, and maybe build a mall. And then all of a sudden, a group of women that were doing their advocacy work, actually it was working for climate change. So they passed via that forest and they came across a tractor clearing the forest. We had written stories about that forest, and I felt the stories were even failing to open up the eyes of people that look here. This is the only forest that is harboring this town from the strong waves of Lake Victoria. So I happened to be part of the women that were marching during that advocacy thing. And when the women blew the whistle, I said, this is my chance now to tell the story better using the women's voices. I had to do a video, I had to do a write-up for the women and put the story out. And guess what? Just last month, the president had to put a stop on clearing of that forest. But we had talked, and talked. People were not listening. So for me, I believe once a woman puts out a voice of a woman and it is resounded more and more and more, people will listen. Thank you. That's what I wanted to share. That at times, at times I lose it and I go for advocacy because that is the only way I feel we can be listened to.
Yeah,
No, thank you, Diana, for sharing that. Advocacy is always a very strong tool around this space, not only just climate and environmental issues, just generally on human rights. It's a very strong tool. So thank you very much for sharing that story. And I see we are almost running out of time. I'm not seeing any other hands or comments in the chat box, but we have talked a lot about, issue safety and security and also innovative ways of telling stories. But I just wanted my colleague Nompilo to just share quickly about, the work that we are doing around support and capacity building of journalists, especially around the issue of risk assessment. Nompilo, would you mind just quickly, maybe a minute or so, sharing about our work in that regard?
Thank you very much, Maricela, and thank you to everyone who joined this insightful conversation. I was literally taking notes and typing away as we're chatting. Thank you to our speakers, for sharing your experiences. I cannot speak to our work in a minute, and I apologize. I'm also hearing my baby in the background there. But I cannot speak to my work in a minute, but what I would say firstly is that we have a project as part of our Africa work where we are prioritizing strengthening climate and environmental journalism in Africa. And as part of that work, we are monitoring attacks, but also we are playing a coordinating role where we are connecting journalists in distress with our partners that have legal support, psychosocial support, temporary relocation support, among other forms of support. So we are playing a role in ensuring that journalists covering these important issues have access to the support that they need whenever they are attacked or targeted because of their reporting. But also we have several resources that we are developing as part of our capacity building work. So like what Marcella said, we have a report in the pipeline on navigating SLAPs or strategic lawsuits against public participation. But also we are developing a resource or a database on emergency support. So all of the information that we have on available forms of support for journalists in distress is going to be available in a report. Also, we are developing a risk assessment guide. So all of the insights that you are mentioning, Vivian and others, I'm going to take note of that also when we work on our risk assessment guide. But building on that, we are also going to have risk assessment trainings. So if there's any opportunity for collaboration for any of these upcoming activities, feel free to get in touch with me. I will type my email in the chat box, but it's nsimanje@ipi.media. And also to highlight that we do have a Signal group, which is a platform for information sharing on anything related to Africa environmental and climate journalism. And in there, we have been sharing information on attacks against climate environmental journalists, but also we have been sharing opportunities for grants and fellowships, and even opportunities for collaboration and coordinated advocacy. So if that is something that you'd also want to be a part of, feel free to also get in touch with me or Maristella, and would be happy to engage further. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Nompilo. I echo what you said in terms of, any opportunities that you have, any insights that you have, any publications that you have that would really contribute to the discussions we are having today. Please feel free to share in the chat or even just reach out to us, because one aspect of this particular webinar was to see how we as stakeholders, we as women journalists or lawyers or other advocates in the space can be able to work together to support stronger climate and environmental reporting. So please do share any resources that you have that can actually benefit the conversations that we're having today. And something I believe it was Elodie who mentioned, that it's very important for us to convene. I think all the panelists mentioned this. Let's convene in these spaces and learn from each other. Sarah, over to you.
Oh,
Sarah,
thank you.
Yes.
I actually wanted to send a text message, but my screen misbehaved and I decided to raise my hand up. First, thank you so much for our speakers. I had two questions. One, for us as a media practitioner, how can we interest ourselves into climate change reporting? Specifically for myself, I'm into disability, but I affect also persons with disability as are affected by climate change. So are there platforms where I can interest myself into reporting on such areas? because I found also so many grant opportunities, but I don't know how to utilize them because I simply lack knowledge on climate change. So, are there platforms where we can interest ourselves into climate change reporting? And then, lastly, can the speakers tell us, highlight some of those areas that maybe we are not paying true attention that we can now consider on writing on? Because myself, I'm a writer with New Vision. So can they quickly maybe highlight us some of those areas that we are not paying attention to? And thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. I think I'll welcome the panelists to respond to your questions. One, around how you can break into this space for somebody who is interested, for a media practitioner who is interested in actually contributing to this space. How can they break into this space? And two, anything that they can do better in terms of resources, in terms of opportunities. I believe that's what Sarah was asking. I lost her for a bit there, but I believe you all had. Since we are running out of time, if there are no other questions, going once, twice, and thrice, I will welcome, the panelists to respond to those questions and also give their final remarks. Starting with you, Elodie.
Thank you, Maristella. To be honest, yes, we have to create our own opportunities, and that's why that's important to have like a forum like this one for us to exchange I mean, I could see in the group chat that a speaker was actually sharing their email for people who wants to share some stories and collaborate. So yeah, I think the only way for us to do a proper coverage when it comes to environmental reporting, but also reporting about anything else as women, we have to work together and that will make us strong. So please feel free to reach whenever you feel like. Thank you.
Thank you, Elodie. Vivian?
I didn't quite get the question from the person who asked.
Well, she had two questions. One, for somebody who is interested in actually pursuing climate and environmental stories, how they can get into this space. And second, I believe it was around, any advice on resources or, programs that they can leverage with regards to climate and environmental reporting, if I got that correctly.
So for someone who wants to get into reporting climate change, I would say you're already doing that if you're a journalist and if you're in any bit, you already have access. You already have your means of telling stories. Because when I look at climate change storytelling, I don't look at it as I don't see it just as a one-way street. It has different branches, right? So if you're someone who is reporting health, if you're someone who is reporting tech, if you're someone who is reporting, any topic at all, there is always an intersection when it comes to climate change. Climate change affects everything. It affects health. It affects tech. Now we're talking AI and environment. It affects, women. It affects different parts of society. It affects businesses. So I feel like if you're a business reporter, you definitely have to find the intersection between what you're doing within the climate finance space, within how businesses are going sustainable, within how businesses are doing their businesses better. If it's health, you're talking about how flooding affects people, cholera, things like that, how it's affecting women, how it's affecting pregnant women. So the intersection is there in everything. You just have to find it and you just have to pitch your tent there and start with that topic that you're comfortable with reporting and find the intersection between that and climate change so you can take your reporting from there. Yeah, so there's really no I wouldn't say, oh, this is how you do that, but you are already in journalism space. Just go ahead and tell your stories. Look out for sources. Don't be afraid. And I think this is one thing that journalists do. Don't be afraid to email people, email organizations. I know in the past couple of months or weeks, I've had journalists that I've spoken to. I know I've spoken like spoken to like 3 journalists, and they're like, "Oh, Vivian, do you have contacts of somebody I can speak to at the World Bank or the IEA and things like that?" And I just basically tell them, email these people. You are a journalist. You basically hold the power. There are people who come to the office. They are comms team. They come to the office every day, and their job is to sit down and wait for your messages and your emails to come in. Ask them questions. If you've seen a report about something that the World Bank has done or the IEA has done, and you need to get to them and say, is this really true, or is this true about the work that you're doing? Email them, and their company is going to get back to you, and you tell your story, you put it out there, and you publish, right? So nobody's going to hand you anything. You just have to go out there and tell those stories and seek accountability and start telling more environmental and climate stories. And also something else in terms of getting to that space is to also look at what's happening globally. Always look at how can I tell this from a climate lens? For example, with what's happening with the world, we already told the story from the renewable energy angle and why it makes sense for people to use more renewables because of what's happening with fuel and gas prices. So you have to look at what's happening globally. Is there any international climate events that are happening? Are there things that is there a way I can enter into this story, to tell a climate story from this thing that is happening? So walk around all of these, and you would see yourself doing more climate stories, getting more angles to tell your stories. And for platforms, you can always, I think I also dropped something on the chat, but I work with Climate Home News, and it's very resourceful, the kind of stories that we do. There are lots of platforms like that you can read their stories to get ideas, to keep yourself updated with what's happening in the climate space globally. In April, we're having the Fossil Fuel Transition Treaty Summit in Colombia. There's the June Bond Climate Talks coming up. So just know some of these important events in the climate space that you can always report on to, and get updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian, for that. And this one?
Thank you, Maristella. I think my colleagues have shared everything and they've said everything that needs to be said. Just from our side, I'd like to mention that the Oxpackers Academy has training opportunities. We're always looking for people to pitch story ideas, to work with us and to collaborate on cross-border stories and perhaps new tech innovations as well. So if you have ideas, if you have thoughts around more work that we can do in your region, please feel free to email us. As Vivian has said, we're not always sitting waiting to receive the emails, but when they do come along, we're always willing to go through them, make some time to speak to people and see how we can collaborate. Another aspect that I'd just like to share in terms of the kinds of stories that people should be pursuing. I don't think we spoke about it a lot or in much detail this morning or afternoon, but I'd encourage a lot of the journalists that are on the call today to perhaps look at following more solutions-focused storytelling. I know a lot of the time with climate and environmental reporting, we're looking at the doom and gloom. We're looking at the impacts, the negative impacts that are happening in our communities and around the world. But I feel that it's also important to highlight how communities are adapting and reporting to some of the climate challenges and environmental issues that they're currently faced with in their communities. And you'd find that a lot of these stories do tend to be led by women in these communities, and they do tend to empower the women in the communities. So perhaps we should also be shifting our focus in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Angie. So, and finally, Diana.
Thank you so much. It's been good hearing from Sarah. I know Sarah. Sarah does good stories with people with disability. And my only word to her is that currently we have flooding, East African flooding, I would call it, so even in Uganda. How about if she, this time round, hosts a person with disability to tell us a story on how this person has maneuvered to live through the flooded Kampala areas? It starts from there. How do you channel your story? Because yes, she has been having these stories of people telling us how they have really managed to live with their disabilities. But then how about looking at disabilities and climate change? There is a lot to talk about there. Disabilities and the floods and, and the hot seasons. There are those disabilities that may not really be accommodative when it comes to the heat waves. For example, I don't know whether people, our colleagues, the albino, I don't know whether they are counted under the disabilities. I don't know, but I think we can angle stories, we can angle programs in that line, and it starts with you, Sarah. It starts with you. You look out to those spaces. Colleagues have said everything that we can reach out there. I would believe that every one of us here who is now doing the climate change bit environment, you just woke up and said, I am done with being a journalist of everything. And I should now settle down with the climate and science journalism. It's headache being everywhere. It's just headache. You can't be in politics, you can't be in education, you can't be in everywhere, you can't be covering. So you just have to collect your brain, put it together and say, I am done with the rest, let me front this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. Very true. Sometimes specialization is, I would say, not even sometimes, specialization does come with its benefits, where you can focus on one thing and put all your energy in actually leading, telling a story to its conclusion in a way that actually brings impact. So thank you, Diana, for that. And thank you very much to our panelists. I think I speak for everyone in saying that this has been a very insightful discussion. We give you your flowers. I think we can give you digital flowers in this regard, but we give you your flowers for the work that you're doing and also for taking the time out of your busy schedules to actually share about the work that you're doing, share about the challenges that you're experiencing, talking about the solutions to some of these challenges, talking about what resources are available, what tools are available that actually improve upon the work that you're doing and ensure that you're actually telling stories in a way that actually brings impact. These are public interest stories that are actually bringing impact, not only to this particular theme and beat of climate and environmental reporting, but generally on the lives and livelihoods of the public. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much to participants for joining in, for sharing on the chat box, for just listening in. And I hope this has also been a meaningful discussion for you all. As we said, with the Nompilo IPI does have a project on strengthening climate and environmental journalism on top of the work that we are doing in terms of capacity building and emergency support and linking journalists at risk to other partners and resources. We also undertake research as we talked about, undertake advocacy, and also, monitor violations that face climate and environmental journalists. But we actually see that the data on this is very limited. And this was talked about the problems of access to information and data, but really the data on this is very limited. And so we do encourage you all, if you have such data, please reach out and share. Let's connect. As our panelists said, let's connect and share in information and data that we have, because data and information is the basis for any advocacy interventions that we can actually undertake. And our work is very much anchored on jointly working with various partners. And so I'm hoping from this particular webinar, we are actually improving our network and building our network in this regard. And so you'll get all our contacts on the IPI website. You'll learn more about the work that we're doing on the IPI website. And I'm sure for Oxpeckers, for Vivian's work, for Dina's work, you can all find us online, but also reach out to me if you need their contacts. But this information is online, and we are happy to connect and continue, building this conversation. So thank you very much, and I wish you a blessed rest of your day and afternoon. Thank you.